It was a day I'll never forget. At the time, it seemed like just a regular Saturday night dinner. Even young Julie was with us, staying over for the weekend as she often did. Julie's mother, Denise, was a widow and worked weekends as a dispatcher for a taxi service. Julie and our daughter Laura had become inseparable since high school, regularly having sleepovers at each other's houses. Julie stayed with us most Fridays and Saturdays while Denise covered her 12-hour night shifts. My wife Sandy knew Denise pretty well, though I'd never met her. Sandy used to joke that Denise might turn my head, so she made sure we never crossed paths at that time. I was traveling often for work, aiming to make my mark in a competitive industry. Sandy usually handled everything with the kids, and on Sundays a cab would swing by to pick up Julie. She loved the treats the cab drivers occasionally brought, and Laura found it all pretty exciting too. That infamous Saturday night dinner, the four of us were at the table sharing a meal when Sandy suddenly looked up and said, "Peter, I want a divorce. I'm leaving you." It felt like a strange prank when your wife of a decade suddenly declares she wants a divorce. It took a moment to process. "I'm serious. I want a divorce. I've met someone else and want to spend my life with him," she continued, as if it was no big deal. A year. There were old girls at the table, including our own daughter. I kept my cool. I might have muttered something ridiculous like, "Well, if that's how it is, I guess I'll start looking for an apartment tomorrow." Sandy replied casually, "No, you'll keep the house. You'll need it for Laura." I sat down, my fork no longer pretending to eat, and just stared at her. "We're going on a trip around the world," she added, still not even glancing at me. "Laura can't miss school," she continued, like she was planning. I couldn't believe it. It was just an ordinary weekend getaway. I said it a little louder than I intended, trying to keep it together for the girls' sake. Sandy must have planned to say it then, knowing I wouldn't make a scene in front of the kids. She said, "I want to see the world while I'm still young enough to enjoy it." She was talking about herself, not me. When we first got together, I was the one passionate about travel. I had dreams of exploring the world after finishing my engineering degree. Sandy and I used to talk about seeing the Grand Canyon, the Rockies, and even New Zealand, but she wanted to have kids first. She said she wanted to do it while I'm young enough to enjoy them. I thought I understood her reasoning. Her parents had been older when they had her, so she wanted to experience life with our kids while she was still youthful. But apparently her perspective changed. Raising Laura wasn't as fulfilling as she'd imagined. The pregnancy and birth hadn't been as easy as she'd thought. It was an easy decision, and she had let go of the idea of more kids without much discussion. I almost laughed at the irony, but instead went out to prune the rose bushes. I just needed to do something to clear my head after a few minutes. I noticed Laura and Julie standing quietly beside me, helping to watch out for thorns. "Girls, be careful you're not wearing gloves," I warned. "We're fine, Dad," Laura replied. "What's your mom doing?" I asked. "She's upstairs packing," Laura said, almost calmly. I felt a surge of anger, but I didn't want to take it out on the roses. Instead, I focused on the girls, resisting the urge to storm upstairs. "Sorry, Laura," I mumbled. "Why are you sorry, Daddy? You didn't leave us." "Mom did, didn't she? Most of her friends at school had dads who'd left, and she'd rather be with a dad who loved her than a mom who—" She left the sentence unfinished. I still wonder what she was going to say. Sandy had always seemed like a caring mother. Had I been oblivious? As I watched the girls working together on a rose bush, I could hear Sandy on the phone, probably talking to her new man. I asked the girls, who cheered, and we headed out to a restaurant to get the biggest Sunday roasts we could find. They took their time enjoying them, giving me a few moments to digest what had just happened and consider what was next. I was surprised. I wasn't all that upset that Sandy was leaving. The love I once felt for her had faded. As soon as she told me, I started thinking about childcare. I could look after Laura, but I'd need help with school drop-offs and holidays. My job wouldn't make it easy to fit in the school schedule. I realized Julie's mom would have her hands full while I figured out mine. I decided to call my sister Beth to explain the situation and see if she could help. My only plan was to see if Beth could pick up Laura. It would be a long drive for her from school, but maybe it could work. She did what Beth almost shouted when I explained what happened, keeping the details vague in front of the girls. I realized I didn't know much about SY's new relationship. She's left us for some guy named Ron. I told her, trying to keep the irritation from seeping through my words. Ron is a customer at the library. Laura chimed in, and Julie added, Mum said he's one of her regulars. Sandy had been working part. I'd been spending a lot of time at the local library recently, which has made it tricky for me to drop Laura off at school every day. I can pick her up in the mornings, but I'm not able to get home from work until 2. It's not possible for Julie's mum to pick Laura up every day. I said that, but it wouldn't be fair to expect her to do that every single day. Laura replied that they already have a plan. Julie will stay with them on weekends and during the week, and I'll stay with Julie and her mum. You can drive us to school on Mondays and then Julie's mum will handle the pickups. Beth, who had overheard the plan, said, I think that's a great idea. Peter, have you asked Julie's mum about this arrangement? No, I've never actually met her, so I wasn't sure she'd be up for it, I replied. Julie then added that her mum wants to work on Sundays, but she doesn't want to impose on Laura's mum too much. It seems the girls have managed to find a solution for me. What does Julie's mum look like? Beth asked. I paused, realizing I had no idea. I've never actually met her. Well, you should go introduce yourself soon and see what she thinks of the arrangement, Beth advised. Then she asked, Has Sandy moved out yet? I don't know. We're out at a restaurant. She was still packing when we left, I replied. Beth suggested I get some new locks while I was in town. Let me know if you need anything. Do you need anything tonight? Josh and I can swing by, but we'd have to bring the kids. Thanks, Beth, but I think we're okay. I've got all the help I need right here, I said, nodding at the girls. They exchanged a grin, and I couldn't help but smile too. Beth wasn't surprised or upset that Sandy was leaving. They weren't close after the ice cream. We went back to the car. I realized I needed to talk to Julie's mother and let her know that I'd be the only adult with the girls that evening. I just wanted to make sure she was comfortable with it. You can never be too careful, especially these days. I'd never actually met Julie's mom. I pulled up to the cab office and left the girls in the car while I went inside. I said, I'm Peter Jackson. I'm looking for Julie's mother, to the cabbie at the counter. I recognized him vaguely from one of Julie's Sunday pickups. Oddly, I didn't even know Julie's. We all just called her Julie's mother, and Julie herself called her mum. The cabbie gestured towards a door labeled Ladies Only with a sign that read Denise's office. The other cab drivers went silent, their eyes fixed on the TV in the corner. After what felt like a long wait, Denise appeared. Denise was strikingly beautiful, simply dressed in a blouse but with a natural elegance. The cabbie announced, Denise, someone's here to see you. Hey Peter, is everything okay? She asked, smiling but with a hint of concern. Yeah, no, well maybe, I replied, feeling a bit awkward. Julie's fine. I just need to talk to you privately. Some of the cabbies started to move but Denise waved them back and we stepped outside. What's going on, Peter? You don't look too great, she observed, spotting the girls in the car waving at them. Sandy left me, I stammered, talking to Denise, feeling odd, especially. She recognized me instantly and her face softened. Oh Peter, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Does this mean we're facing a childcare challenge tonight? No, not at all. I just wanted you to know I'd be watching the girls alone tonight, since we hadn't officially met. I thought you should know. You're fine, Peter. Julie talks about you all the time. She practically thinks of you as a second dad. She even has a photo of you by her bed. Where did she get that? I asked, surprised. Laura must have given it to her, Denise replied with a small smile. Do you want me to take the night off and bring the girls with you? I'm sure you'll be fine watching Julie. I just thought you'd want to know. She'll be in good hands. I'll come by tomorrow morning to pick her up. You should get some rest. You have a long shift. I said I'd like to meet up later to go over some plans if you're up for it. I can even drop Julie off. Denise replied thoughtfully, but don't worry, we'll figure something out. The girls have been cooking up all kinds of ideas. I smiled reassuredly. Denise seemed genuinely relieved. Thanks, Peter. I'll see you tomorrow night, and don't worry, Julie is a joy. She gave the girls a hug and told them to behave, and we headed home. But when we pulled into the driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked there. Sandy stepped out and waved. Have you been? I've been waiting for hours, she demanded, giving me no chance to reply before announcing that she was leaving. If that's who I think it is, tell him to move his car before I do it myself. I snapped, frustrated by the sight of her new guy's car in our driveway. Sandy gestured at him and a Jaguar across the street roared to life and pulled away, ignoring her. I backed into the spot the Jaguar had vacated. She complained that I almost hit her, but I just replied, "Oh, you're still here? I thought you'd left." I walked toward the house, not taking your car, and asked, "Why is the Nissan sitting empty while?" The Jaguar was packed to the brim, so I suggested we sell it. "We're flying out on Wednesday," she replied before I could ask. She then told me Ron's lawyer's address is on the kitchen table. I didn't wait around to hear what she had to say and went inside, with the girls following. They gave each other a high five, but I pretended not to notice. We watched TV for a bit, and then I sent them to bed. They said they didn't argue, which was unusual for Laura, but I think they sensed it was time for me to unwind. I poured myself a couple of whiskeys, hoping it would help me get some sleep. The next morning, I woke to the smell of bacon. I thought Sandy was making breakfast, but then I remembered what happened the day before. The house felt different. It seemed like all traces of Sandy had been wiped away, even the pictures of her parents were gone. I checked the bathroom and sure enough, her personal items had vanished too. It seemed like someone had cleaned up. During the night, I was woken up by Laura calling from the stairs in the kitchen. The girls had set up breakfast like a hotel breakfast with coffee, juice, and fries. They even had cornflakes and tea set out. I complimented them and they told Beth, Josh, and their kids arrived before we finished eating despite the chaos. Despite the broken coffee maker, the girls managed to serve coffee to Beth and Josh. They needed a bit of encouragement, but soon they left the dishes to go play with their cousins. Meanwhile, Beth began washing up and Josh and I had coffee while I filled him in on what had happened. They both reassured me that they'd help however they could. Josh recommended we got a good divorce lawyer and Beth put together dinner from what we had in the fridge. I spent most of the day tending to the roses with Julie and Laura, who popped by now and then to help out. At one point, Julie quoted a line from a song, "It's been a good year for the roses." It was a bittersweet moment, given everything that had happened. At 30, a cab pulled up and Denise arrived. The girls let Denise in and we got properly acquainted. Beth, Denise, and I discussed the girls' babysitting arrangement. Denise confirmed that she'd be taking a Sunday night shift, which would pay more than her current schedule. We settled on a plan with some minor tweaks and Beth's occasional help during school breaks. Denise called her boss right away to confirm the new shift, and he had agreed on the spot. She glanced at me for approval, and I nodded. We then realized Julie needed her school clothes for the next day, so Beth drove Denise and Julie home to pick them up with Laura tagging along. I carried Julie's bag into the house and asked Denise if she had a car. I do or did, but since Micah left, I can't really afford to keep one, she replied. Well, what about using SY's old car? I suggested, pointing to SY's car in the driveway. Oh, I can't, Denise said, shaking her head. Why not? She told me to get rid of it, but you'll need it to take Laura to and from school. Don't worry about that. Just call the insurance company and add you as a driver. I insisted, but Laura piped up. His name's Ron. Dad? Who cares? I muttered. Ron the Rat sounds better to me, I replied, frustrated. Laura laughed, pointing out that Ron the Rat sounded like a puppet character from her favorite show. I couldn't help but smile and let it go. Over the next few weeks, we adjusted to our new routines. Beth and Josh often visited on Saturdays to check the pantry, and sometimes made us lunch. Housework was never my strong suit. I managed to keep things in order, and Beth never complained. Weekdays felt lonely, but I adjusted. Fridays were a highlight when I'd come home to Denise and the girls. Denise usually cooked for us before her Friday night shift, which made the empty house a little more bearable. The toughest part was waking up alone every morning. The divorce process was complicated. Sandy and her new guy had skipped the country, bouncing around, which made it hard for her lawyer to contact her. On top of that, her ex, my wife, was trying to get child support, and her Italian accounts were frozen every so often. Her lawyer would call me, and I'd pass along whatever info Laura had found out about her mom's whereabouts. I don't know if Laura understood why I needed those details, but her intel helped my case. Sandy not communicating with her lawyer worked in my favor at one court hearing. Her lawyer asked for another delay, saying he was waiting on a response from her. The judge looked pretty frustrated. He asked Mr. Jackson, "Do you know where your wife is?" "I'm sorry, sir," I replied, standing up. "I haven't spoken with my wife since she left us." I didn't mention her brief calls to Laura every few weeks, as the judge hadn't asked about them. The judge told my lawyer that he'd given my wife 21 days to challenge his decision in court. Then he turned back to me and said, "I'm surprised you haven't demanded child support from your wife. Frankly, there's little chance of collecting it unless she returns to the country." I replied that he'd ordered a nominal $100 monthly payment, knowing it was unlikely I'd ever see a cent. Still, it set a precedent. He advised my lawyer to look into any assets. Sandy might still have an Italian connection, but I never bothered to follow up. I walked out of court a single man with full custody of Laura and rights to any property Sandy had left behind on Monday. I noticed an international call in the call log from the day before, likely from Sandy, but neither Laura nor Julie mentioned it. I figured it out, but didn't dwell on it. Our new routine kept me busy enough, as time passed. Sandy's calls to Laura became less frequent, which didn't surprise me. They were brief and one-sided. Apart from Laura's subtle questions about her mom's location, which stopped altogether once Ron's divorce was finalized, somehow Laura and Julie found out about it, likely through school connections. The divorce was finalized about 4 months ago. One Saturday while we were out for a movie and burgers, Julie casually mentioned that she and her mom might have to move because of a rent increase. I hadn't realized. This was all part of a plan the girls had been cooking up for a while to move in with us at dinner that Friday. Laura asked Denise, "So have you found a new apartment yet?" Julie then told some exaggerated stories about their search. Laura then suggested, "Why don't you and Julie just move in with us? We have a spare room." I thought about Laura's suggestion, realizing it could. I thought it might save Denise from paying rent and cut down on her hectic schedule, but when I looked at her, she quickly avoided making contact. I didn't want to put her on the spot, so I tried to tread carefully. Sometimes people get the wrong idea about a man and a woman living together, I said cautiously. Denise laughed. "Oh, come on, Peter. You sound like a prude. I was just thinking about your reputation." "My reputation?" She snorted. "You've got to be kidding. The folks at my complex already gossip about me because I'm gone every weekend and drive a new car. They think I'm doing something shady." "You're joking?" "Nope. They even wrote to my landlord. I told them I work at a cab company, but the rumors just won't die. You need to get out of there." "I know, but finding an affordable place isn't easy." She sighed, "But Laura's idea does." "I see your point. There's plenty of space here." "You're right. Without the girls, this place feels a bit dead." "You're not a bad cook either." "Should I take that as a compliment?" "Yes, absolutely. The room is yours if you want it. The girls would love to have you both here." Denise hesitated. "We have to talk about rent." "No need. I don't like housekeeping and you're a much better cook. Maybe you could handle the cooking?" "I'll take care of the cooking, and I'll cover utilities and cleaning supplies." Denise said we'll work out the details later, But you're sure you want us here? Definitely. When do you want to move in? Well, our apartment is furnished, but honestly, most of it can go. I sold the good stuff years ago after Micah left, so we agreed. Denise and Julie moved in with Laura and me as we moved her things. I noticed Denise's look when I asked. I knew her husband had died in a car accident years ago, but the details were still raw for her. Later, while walking Denise to her car, I heard a loud smack from behind us and saw Laura and Julie looking overly innocent. Denise and Julie moved in the next week. Most of Denise's furniture was discarded, though a few pieces made it into the house with the rest stored in the garage. Her TV and stereo ended up in the garage too. Once I was up in the girls' room, I felt like I was back home. My mood lifted, and I stopped going out for after-work drinks. I had bedtime stories to read now, and my boss started sending others on work trips, letting me stay home shortly after Denise moved in. I started to fall for her, though I did my best to keep it to myself. Denise was a year younger than me, always polished and full of humor. She was easygoing with the girls, and somehow I realized I'd loved her from the start, though I hadn't fully admitted it. Beth noticed first during Christmas while setting the table. She asked, "So have you told Denise yet? Have you told her what I asked?" I replied, "Don't be ridiculous." Beth said, "Peter, you can read me like an open book. You're more taken with Denise than you ever were with Judy Reyes." Beth and her friends helped me get over it. "I like Denise, but I don't want to ruin the balance here," I said. "Peter, she likes you as much as you like her. Even the girl can see it. What should I do?" "Tell her how you feel, Peter. You've won hearts before." Sandy was different, though. "You never liked Sandy, did you know?" "I didn't. She had you wrapped around her finger, but Denise genuinely cares for you." The girls just then Denise came into the kitchen to check on dinner, and Beth and I quickly changed the subject throughout the meal. Beth kept giving me knowing looks and even shared some private jokes with Laura and Julie over the next few days. I came close to bringing it up with Denise several times, but I always chicken out. It was New Year's Eve, and Denise had to work. Beth and Josh took the girls, so I could go to an office party. I reluctantly agreed, but by 4:00 m. By the time I called a cab, the party had died down. I was surprised when Denise answered. "Hey gorgeous, can you send one of the guys to take me home?" she slurred. "Are you serious?" I laughed. I had a tough time deciding which phone number to call. "Try not to get sick in the car," she joked, still laughing. Ted, the driver, arrived and helped me into the cab. As we drove, I realized we weren't headed toward my house. "Wrong way," I mumbled. "To put you to bed, and it won't be me. I think I know who'll volunteer." Ted chuckled. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, Ted and Denise were helping me out of the cab. Denise clung to my arm as we headed to the door, and Ted helped me upstairs. Denise began loosening my tie and helping me get comfortable, feeling emboldened. I saw it as my moment. Denise leaned over, and I muttered, "You know, you're one incredibly gorgeous woman." "Oh, really, Peter? And what does that mean exactly?" "It means you're too good to resist," I slurred. "How much have you had to drink tonight?" she asked, amused. "Not enough? If I'd had a bit more, I'd have the guts to tell you how much I love you," I admitted. "Tell me when you're sober, and maybe I'll believe you. Now get some sleep." She started to leave, but I gently held her arm and pulled her down beside me. She didn't try to get up, and I fell asleep the next morning as the sun came in and my headache started. I was disappointed to see that Denise wasn't there with me. I tried to lift my head and groan in pain. "Here, drink this," I heard Denise's voice behind me. "What is it?" I asked, squinting against the sunlight. "Relax. It's not poison. I'll wait until you marry me. I need that life insurance first," she teased. "Oh, yeah? How do you know?" "I won't let you get away with it," I replied, trying to sound clever. "You couldn't, Peter. You have 2 daughters who depend on you," she said with a smirk. "One of them is yours," I reminded her. "They see themselves as sisters and they see you as their father," she noted. Well, Lauren has started calling you Mom too. She's even said it a few times recently. Denise seemed surprised. I hadn't noticed, and Julie's been calling me Dad for at least a month. I added. As it happens, Denise looked astonished. Even Beth and Josh noticed. I confirmed, did you discuss it with Beth on Boxing Day? She inquired. Oh, we discussed plenty. I replied, trying to keep the conversation light despite my hangover. I think she's already planning her outfit for a wedding. I joked. Denise sat beside me holding the drink she'd made, looking a bit lost in thought. Breaking the silence, I asked, so, are you going to marry me? Or there might be other things you haven't asked me yet. I wanted to gauge your answer first, so it'd be less embarrassing if you say no. I explained that it wouldn't hurt to ask. She replied with a glint of humor in her eye, but I prompted her, sensing something unsaid. I have a confession to make. I'm not a widow. Mike is not dead. She confessed that legally, I was never married to him. I felt a wave of confusion. Wait, what? Mitchell was a bigamist. He was already married when he married me. So our marriage was invalid, she explained calmly. Wow, so you're not actually a widow and you were never legally married. I clarified that it's just easier to let people think I'm a widow. She admitted with a shrug. In that case, I began feeling bolder. Would you do me the honor of? But then we got distracted, and before I knew it, we were wrapped up in each other, kissing and laughing. By the time Josh dropped the girls off at 3, we were still wrapped up in each other. Morning. Denise and I were in the kitchen trying to figure out how to break the news to the girls. They seemed to catch on right away, probably because Denise was practically sitting on my lap. They hugged us both, and when Josh came in, he laughed and congratulated us. We set a date for mid in February. We planned a simple celebration, but the girls dreamed of something grand. We settled on a modest event with a registry office ceremony and a small reception afterwards. Neither of us had many close relatives, and the registry office gave Denise peace of mind without the need for public announcements, which was simpler considering her widow status after Josh left. After he left, Denise had the awkward task of resigning from her job at the cab company. She didn't want to work night shifts anymore, though that did mean I'd miss her during those nights. We agreed to sleep in separate bedrooms until the wedding. We slept in separate bedrooms until the wedding. I wanted to set a good example for the girls. Once they were back in school, I started coming home for lunch. It lifted my spirits quite a bit. The following weekend, Denise worked her last shifts at the cab office. Her colleagues sent her off with flowers and chocolates. On Sunday night, several drivers and their wives took us out for a farewell dinner at a local pub. There wasn't a cab to be found in town that night. Our wedding day came quickly and went off without a hitch. The girls were great as bridesmaids and Denise looked amazing. We spent one night in the honeymoon suite at a luxury hotel where we held the reception, while Beth and Josh took the girls back home. We planned to spend most of the school's summer vacation traveling together as a family that first year. We spent 5 weeks exploring Florida, the Caribbean and Arizona, doing as much as we could. A couple of weeks after the wedding, I noticed something was bothering Denise. The girls were happy, but Denise seemed troubled. Once they went to bed, I asked her what was on her mind. Mind you, Peter, does Julie know that Micah isn't actually dead? She asked, her face worried. I was taken aback by her question. How would she know? We've never talked about it with them. Denise explained that the girls had started hiding photos of Sandy and Micah in their drawers when she asked. Julie replied that they didn't need to see their pictures. Julie knew her father hadn't died in an accident, he'd left. She didn't know the full story though. Denise had decided not to go into further detail, not wanting to burden Julie with the fact that Julie didn't seem affected by the truth, which was surprising. In fact, it seemed to strengthen the bond between her and Laura. Denise turned out to be a remarkable wife and mother. She was endlessly patient with the girls and with me, even when things got stressful at work. Despite my faults, Denise never complained and kept a playful sense of humor that made every day a bit brighter. Our nights were often busy, but always filled with warmth and laughter. By early summer, SS calls to Laura had nearly stopped. Laura's irritation with her had also decreased. As time went on, my mum grew and started referring to Denise as new mum in their brief conversations. When Sandy called, she would talk about our family activities and refer to Denise as Dad's wife and Julie as her sister. Denise and I discussed Laura's approach, but we realized we couldn't control how she handled her feelings. Sandy would just have to deal with the consequences of her actions before summer vacation ended. Then, Laura and Julie began asking if we were truly their mom and dad. They left adoption brochures lying around the house, dropping hints about Denise adopting Laura and me, adopting Julie. They even found forms to change Julie's last name to Jackson after talking it over. Denise and I decided to pursue both adoptions, though Julie's father still held legal rights. Our attorney, who had managed my divorce, handled the process. It took over a year, but we were eventually able to terminate Micah's parental rights and finalize the adoptions. Coincidentally, the same judge from my divorce case oversaw Micah's termination. Officially, we became Mr. and Mrs. Jackson with our daughters, Laura and Julie. We did think about having more children, but decided against it. Not long after the marriage, I got a promotion with a nice pay rise, which meant I could work more. This gave us the chance to go on family trips, which made up for all the travel I dreamed of but never done. In our second year, we spent 5 weeks in Europe. In the third year, we went to Thailand and Vietnam. By the fifth summer, Laura and Julie, who were now 14, had documented everything on their video cameras. That year, we planned a trip through Canada, the northern US, and Alaska with the girls, who were eagerly drafting detailed plans. About 2 years into our marriage, Sandy started sending Christmas cards with Canadian stamps, suggesting that she and Ron had we were settled there, so we never responded since she left no return address. Sandy was hardly mentioned, and she hadn't called Laura in years, so we didn't dwell on it. Our master travel plan changed when the girls pointed out that we couldn't visit every destination in one summer. After cutting down the list, we decided to focus on the West that year and save the East for next time. We arrived in Ontario at the end of June and spent a couple of days exploring the historic sites there. We then drove west through Manitoba and Saskatchewan, then south into the deserts of Nebraska and Kansas, before looping back north through Colorado and Wyoming. We stayed at a dude ranch, which was nice, but I found the western saddles a bit nerve-wracking. The motel was pretty basic, but it had its own charm. After checking in, we headed to a nearby diner, which was pretty crowded and noisy. But then, suddenly, a loud clatter silenced the place. A waitress had dropped a tray of food, and as we turned to see, I recognized her. She stared back at me, equally stunned, and her hand shook as she looked down at the scattered food. Denise recognized her too, and we exchanged glances before turning to our girls. There was nothing to worry about. "Laura, eat your dinner," Denise assured her. "Same to you, Julie," I added, instinctively, addressing our own daughter first, even 5 years after. The other diners, realizing we were somehow involved in the incident, kept glancing at us. Laura quickly recognized the woman and muttered, "So be it," before returning to her meal. Julie started a bit longer, then smiled at me, glanced at her mother, and went back to eating as we headed to the car. Denise whispered to me, "I guess the grass wasn't as green as it looked on the other side." I asked if she was working here. "She's probably no longer with Ron. One of them likely cheated." "One cheater, one a cheater," I replied. Leaving her daughter was like cheating too. "It doesn't matter if she didn't cheat on me." Denise shrugged. "Only if she tries to stir up trouble now. Laura's been through enough. It's too late for her to cause any real trouble," I said. "Laura handled it better than I did, that's for sure." The girls, Denise started but trailed off. "Don't say it, niece. I know how clever they are and I'm thankful for it. I just wonder how far their plans go," I said with a grin. Denise chuckled. "I wouldn't worry. I think everything is just as it should be." I opened the front door for Denise, who paused for a moment before wrapping her arms around my neck and kissing me from the back seat. The girls were murmuring and cheering, teasing us with comments like "not in public" and "wait until you're in your room." Despite their playful remarks, both girls had a maturity beyond their years. Julie had lost her father at the age of 6, and Laura's mother left when she was only. Denise broke the kiss and whispered, "We have an audience." I glanced over my shoulder to see Sandy standing in the diner doorway, watching us intently. "Do you think Laura should meet her mother?" I asked. "I think she has to," Denise replied. "I wanted it to be on her own terms. I think you should go and see your mom. You might regret not taking this chance." Laura sighed. "She is your mother, and you might regret not taking this chance." But Laura immediately stepped back. It was frustrating not being able to hear their conversation, though it seemed like Laura was doing most of the talking each time Sandy tried to get closer. "This isn't going well," Denise muttered, watching the interaction closely. "I know," I replied, feeling the tension. Eventually, Laura turned and ran back to the car and jumped in. She slammed the door and buckled her seatbelt without saying anything. Sandy disappeared back into the diner. I was ready to drive off, but Denise had other plans. She was already halfway to the door before Laura finished buckling in. I waited, letting Denise handle it. She came back about 10 minutes later, her expression saying, "Let's talk later." I started the car, and we drove to our next destination. We stopped at a quiet spot along the river where we planned to take a walk and see the waterfalls that the town was famous for. The dams had taken away some of their natural splendor, but they were still impressive. Denise and I never overdo the hiking thing, so we let the girls go ahead, giving us a chance to talk privately. "So, what did she say?" I asked. "Turns out he left her," Denise replied. "Turns out he left her for a waitress in this town." "Exactly what we guessed. I wonder why she didn't just go back to Italy," I said, shaking my head. "She was left with the motel. Bill, the owner, offered her work in the restaurant to pay it off. Now she shares a room with another woman. Both working days in the restaurant and nights in the bar," Denise explained. "Sounds like a..." I muttered sarcastically, "What a lovely setup. So what does she do for fun?" "Peter, don't be so harsh. She made her mistakes and she's paying the price now," Denise replied calmly. "Anyway, she'll meet with you after her restaurant shift at 6. I'll take the girls out for dinner so you two can talk." "What am I supposed to say to her?" I asked, frustrated. "Peter, you need to get closure. She's still Laura's mother, and that's something. It's too bad she didn't think of that before," I said bitterly. "She regrets what she did. Peter, she wants to apologize to you and Laura. Even if Laura isn't ready to accept it, just take this time and talk with her." Denise's voice softened. "We don't want to lose Laura over this." I looked at her. Denise replied thoughtfully, "You're a lot more forgiving about this than I expected, especially after what Micah did to you, Peter. Holding on to hate doesn't help anyone. We realized we'd all been deceived. We weren't to blame, so we became friends, not rivals. Now, if he shows up, I'll report him to the police, but I won't spend a second hating him. I have people who matter far more." Denise kissed my cheek. "Besides, think about it. If Sandy hadn't left, where would we be now?" "You're right," I admitted with a sigh. "Thank you, Denise. Now let's hurry. It's almost 4, she said, glancing at her watch. I waited in the restaurant car park until Sandy came out after her shift. She emerged with another woman who gave me a scrutinizing look before heading off. Sandy looked nervous, a shadow of the confident woman I remembered. She looked remarkably the same. "Hi Peter, thanks for coming," she greeted me, her voice uncertain. "The bar was empty, so let's go there and talk," I replied, gesturing for her to lead the way. She led us to a booth in the back, clearly expecting me. The other woman, now behind the bar, exchanged a few words with the bartender, and all the nearby booths were empty. Once we were seated, Sandy took a deep breath. And said, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry, Peter. You've done me a favor," I replied. "I should have known she'd move on as soon as I left," she said, her tone bitter. "That wasn't the case," I replied. "From the moment I met Denise, I knew I wanted to be with her. Maybe I'd have left if I'd known her first, but who knows? I don't think I would have. I'm not one to walk away from my responsibilities. I paused, reflecting. So what happened to Ron? Oh, that fortune he flaunted was a lie, she replied, her tone turning dark. He left his wife and kids with nothing, and she took what little he had. He was wanted for fraud and stealing from people. I wouldn't be surprised if that's why he left me too. The last I heard, he slipped across the border into Canada when the FBI started closing in. He took off with a waitress. Ironically, now I'm working the job she left behind. Did the FBI come after you? I also asked. Yeah, but I made a deal. If I testify against him, they'll go easy on me. I'm on probation for 2 years, restricted to this area until they find him. I report every week, but it's manageable since the sheriff's deputy, Tex Works, is nearby. Are you still paying off his debts? I've almost cleared them, but there's still a little bit left. She admitted, seeing her struggle. I pulled out my checkbook. She started to protest, but I insisted. Sandy, do as you're told, I said firmly. This should clear your debt and give you a little cushion if you decide to return to Italy. I'll help you get settled. But remember, this doesn't mean you can interfere in our lives. You know the court stripped you of all parental rights to Laura. She made that clear earlier. Sandy nodded and said, Oh, I'm sorry, that's not why we sent her to talk to you. I clarified. I realize that now, Peter. I was foolish. I never meant to hurt you or Laura. I got caught up in Ron's promises, and it wasn't worth it. I appreciate the apology, Sandy, I said. But that's all in the past. Laura and I have moved on. Denise and I. I'll try to make sure Laura keeps in touch with you, but understand that she has a new life now. That's more than I deserve, Peter. I don't deserve this check either, she said, holding it uncertainly. You'd better take it, Sandy. It'll help me sleep better, knowing I did what I could. We'll be by tomorrow morning for breakfast. Maybe you can say a proper goodbye to Laura. Her voice shook as she replied, Thank you, Peter. You're being more kind than I deserve. No, Sandy, I said, standing up. You're Laura's mother. And I can't change that now. I'd like to get back to my family, of course. I'm sorry, Peter, she whispered as I walked away without looking back. When I found Denise and the girls, they were waiting for me, all eyes on my face. I pulled Denise aside, gave her a brief summary of the conversation, and mentioned the check. She said your kindness was all she deserved. That's exactly what she said, I replied, kissing my wife, but thank you for being there. I added, feeling grateful for her. I pulled Laura aside. I was about to start with the only have one birth mother routine when she told me Denise and Julie had already covered it. Laura planned to talk to her mother at breakfast the next morning, but she wanted either Julie or me to be there with her. When I asked why, she simply replied, because someone was always with me at the funeral. I left it at that. The next morning, Laura, Julie and Sandy sat at a table nearby talking for quite a while. I guess she was cold the workers were covering her shift because she didn't seem rushed. From what I overheard, the only part of the conversation I caught was the two girls excitedly talking about the roses growing in our garden. They all smiled throughout, and as we were getting ready to leave, Sandy came over, hugged the girls, and gave them each a goodbye kiss. Unexpectedly, she turned to Denise and me. These two were lucky, she said. She said she'd found the best mom and dad she could ever have, in a soft voice that surprised me. Then she turned and hurried back to the diner. I kissed Denise and we got in the car and drove north towards the Canadian border. From the way the girls gazed out of the back window, I could tell they weren't looking back with any regret about leaving that town behind. We returned home, and Sandy kept in touch with us from time to time. Denise made a point of sending her letters regularly, but we never found out if the FBI caught up with Ron. Less than a year later, we heard that Sandy was marrying her deputy sheriff in Texas. We talked about going to the wedding, but we decided not to as a family. However, I felt I had to go alone, so I slipped away. I spent a few days with Tex, as everyone called him. He turned out to be a decent guy. He picked me up at the airport and introduced me to his friends and family. From what I gathered, Sandy had been completely open with him, admitting her past mistakes. Tex had even arranged for some trucker friends to send her Christmas cards from all over Canada. He was probably trying to hide her real circumstances and give away my ex. My wife's wedding was a bit strange, but maybe it was the closure I needed over the following years. We learned that Sandy had 2 boys with Tex, though we never met them. Laura and Julie kept in touch with their half-brothers as they grew up, though neither of them mentioned them to us often. Laura and Julie eventually married 2 brothers, and they remained as close as ever. They played such a major role in their marriages that I almost felt I'm sorry for their husbands when our girls put their heads together. No one, including me, could keep up. Both had 2 children, and amusingly, their daughters were born. Now, not only are they close in age, but they're also almost right next door to each other. Denise and I have loved watching our grandkids grow. We see glimpses of their mothers in them every day. Last year, I retired as managing director. Now, Denise and I are finally enjoying an 8-month world tour. Over the past month, we've been discussing the possibility of finding a place to settle down, but I have a feeling that our family will eventually be drawn back to Italy. The girls are adamant that we shouldn't sell the house, as they're attached to the garden roses and spend a lot of time there. I still get updates from them, and just this morning, I found a photo of my garden with the caption, "It's been a good year for the roses." Life goes on.